Yeah, she did my second one day. I got 19
Yeah,
days.
turn it on.
Okay.
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 I did my thesis on student improvement through motivational strategies. I did it through, it's my actual research. It's done through Concordia University, School of Education, National Arts, Educational Technology. My advisor is Kristen Domingo. Okay, the problem with purpose. For what I did to identify what the problem was, student motivation in class. We all know motivation has been a huge issue for teachers throughout the years. So one of the things I was looking at was student motivation. In my class, I had to deal with non-suits, the lack of desire to participate, struggling to get students involved, parties to class, and coming late, faking illness, injury, and missing classes. Those are some of the huge problems we have in PE and what I always struggled with since I've been here for 16 years. The purpose is, I took on this intervention was to find an intervention or interventions that would increase my student participation and motivation. And to find that out, I had to obviously find out the types of motivation my students respond to, the types of motivations that are out there. And some of the motivations that when I did my research was A motivation, extrinsic motivation, and intrinsic motivation. I knew motivation as just a word, but all the different levels was really interesting when I started doing my research. So my biggest purpose of this was to, what can I do in PE to get my kids involved? And like all teachers, they're always looking to find out what they can do to get their students involved. The setting and participants, obviously we work in an inner city school. One thing that I had to really work with was when I looked at my setting was inner city, Southern California. Students came from a very diverse background. It's very interesting to see that here in this area that I work, can't really get into details because of confidentiality of where the students are. But the area in this area where we work, 40% of this area is white, or 46%. 40% are Hispanic, 13.5% are African American, 12% Asian, 5% were two or more mixed. So we have a really mixed culture with the students, so we get a lot of different types of kids here. Our school is a Title I school with 97% of the students on a free or reduced lunch. So we have a lot of kids that are eating free, so we have a lot of needy kids in our area. So, you know, it's going to be run into kids that probably have a lack of motivation because what I sense is, you know, a lot of things are given to them, so that can play into it. Student population for the school site, large population of Hispanics, about 83%, 10% African American, 3% Asian, 3% other, which is a lot of mixed, and really 1% white. And it's really evident. I think I have like one white student in all of my classes. Total student population, we're approximately 1,055 students, give or take, because it fluctuates all through the year. 3% of those are in special education programs. So really not a lot in special ed, even though it seems like we have a lot of students that are in special services. Really not a lot of them are. But we do struggle with the students. A lot of our students are speaking English, but 34% are English language learners. So we are getting a pretty good mix of kids that are still coming in that don't speak fluently in English. So that could be part of the problems that we face too. The study was conducted in my 5th period class. The intervention took place during a weight room unit and was conducted for 4 weeks. Participants. In my fifth grade class, there were 44 students in this intervention. Not a large class. It was about the right size, so a lot of my students range from anywhere from 45 to 54 students, but this class I only had 44. 27 of those students were 7th graders, and 17 of those students are 8th graders. Of those, 21 are female and 23 are male. So it was almost 50-50. So it was a nice little mix. 64% of my students are what we call reclassified fluent English proficient. 23 are classified as English learners. 13 are classified as English only. The majority of my students are Hispanic, with 1 Asian and 1 African American during the study, so largely Hispanic group. All of my students, when they participated, signed their participation forms and were assigned a number for confidentiality reasons, so I will not be talking about any student's name particularly in here. Background knowledge for the literature review. In order to find out, what kind of intervention was going to work for me and what I needed to do, I had to do a lot of research on types of motivation that students might exhibit in school. And according to Sasson, motivation is the inner power that pushes you towards taking actions towards achievement. So we all know we always want our students doing as much as possible and on as much as possible on time, on task, and struggle with that. We're always reminding our kids to do stuff. We're always pushing our kids, and we're always trying to find that balance to get them to do it without having us to be on them all the time. And in PE, we're struggling with that all the time. It's constantly getting kids to be participating in class. So one of the things I was kind of in my beginning thoughts with my students is a lot of my students I thought suffered from what they would call amotivation, which is the relative absence of motivation where individuals do not perceive contingencies between actions and subsequent outcomes, which basically means they don't really see a purpose to what they're doing, so they don't find a need to do it. So I kind of felt in the beginning that's what my students were doing, that they'd come to class and just kind of do, mosey around, not really do what they were supposed to do. And that bothers me. So when I read about it and kind of got deeper into it, then my thoughts kind of started changing because I thought they started falling more into the one below this, which is called extrinsic motivation, which is the performance of a task in order to earn a reinforcement such as an award, tangible item, or improved grade. So anytime the kids were out there doing anything and said, okay, if you go do this, you'll get this, they perked up. So it's just like, So I noticed that more kids were more motivated if something was offered in a reward or a tangible item. But as we were reading, and some of my literature authors were pointing out, like Pink in 2009, he said we want to try to get our students more intrinsic motivation kind of mode, which is this is where the individual comes deep within themselves, where they derive the interest of pleasure and enjoyment for the mere fact of doing what they're doing. And I don't know, I haven't really seen a lot of my kids expressing or exhibiting intrinsic motivation unless they're doing a specific activity they really like. And in PE, most of the kids love soccer, they love basketball, they love football. So it really doesn't take a lot to get them involved in that. And to say that a student is totally intrinsic would be not correct, because in my literature they said Ballard, when one of the authors was saying, to say that they're intrinsic or extrinsic is really inaccurate because a student can be both at any given moment. So when they were talking about that, DC and Ryan and Sun and Chen came down to what they call the self-determined theory, which emphasizes by helping learners to internalize extrinsic motivation as to regulate their learning behavior from a motivation state. So basically what he's saying is self-determined theory takes kids that are amotivated and they start working through steps through extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation. So in order to really look at that, they talked about the self-determined theory. Individuals' behaviors are manipulated by 3 types of motivation, which I just talked about. DC and Ryan states that extrinsic motivation can vary greatly in degree. An example would be a student who fears parental punishment for not completing a required task. Then you have those who complete the task because they find it instrumental for their course that they seek. So it's an intrinsic motivation through self-determined theory is you can get someone to do something, or they do it because they know they have to, not because they want to. And then you have kids or individuals who seek it because they have to take a career and it's required, so they need, in order to get to that career, they got to do it. So it's a motivator is that item that they have to finish. The A motivation, the relative absence of motivation, is what Carlson said is alienation is how it is described in middle school and high school students that A motivation, these students had a low perception of sense of competence and adherence to the rules, which we see it a lot here. We see a lot of kids who have no competence and adhere to the rules. So if you see students that are exhibiting those behaviors, they're more on the A motivated end because they don't see the purpose of doing it or doing the activity. And this leads students to being non-participants. So as teachers in here, do you guys see that in your classrooms?
Yes.
So I see it all the time. If they don't have an understanding of why they're learning it, they're not going to do it. So as a teacher, we are pushing our students to have a reason for what they're doing. And in our staff meetings, I know we hear that a lot. There are 4 beliefs that lead to A motivation in students. It's deficiency, ability, and beliefs, which is their ability to believe the importance of what they're doing. Deficiency, effort. They don't find the effort in doing it worthwhile. Insufficient values and unappealing characteristics. If they don't see it like it's anything that's worth doing and having fun, they're not going to do it. DC and Ryan also concluded that A-motivated students lack 3 major psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. The autonomy is the ability to do something on their own. If they don't have that ability, they're not going to do it. If they don't have the competence, which is the understanding of what they're doing, they're not going to do it. And if they cannot relate it, they are not going to do it. So if those 3 things are evident in students with A motivation, you're really going to struggle with students. But then you have intrinsic motivation. This is the behavior that comes from individuals who are engaged in activities for the sake of pleasure. Do you have kids in your class that love doing what they do? Okay, we all do. We all have a few of those kids. They like doing what they're doing. So it doesn't take a lot of us to push them in the direction that they need to go. And the personal satisfaction that comes from it and the enjoyment is why they do it. And DC and Ryan stated that in humans, intrinsic motivation is present from birth. When we're little kids, you always see kids running and getting into stuff, always doing stuff that they want to get into, enjoy. They're always learning. So what happens is people are active and always learn, and the incentives are not necessary because natural motivation tendencies is what they say is a critical element in cognitive, social, and psychological or physical development. But as we get older and the kids move through school, we get into a regimen of things, and that intrinsic motivation tends to get lost. And we are now forced with A motivation and intrinsic motivation. And in this case, intrinsic motivation is engaging in a task that will result in a reward, tangible item, or improving one's grade. We see that, I see that a lot in my kids. If I want them to do something, it seems like I always have to offer them something to do it.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because we want them to do it because it's important for them and we want them to understand that. And sometimes I think if we don't show the reason why it's important, they just don't get it. So sometimes the easy way is okay, I'll give you a pizza party if you do this for me. It's kind of like, here, I'll do this if you do this. So intrinsic motivation usually occurs when students are not interested in a subject or activity, thus requires some sort of external push. When freedoms to be intrinsically motivated become curtailed by social demands, students become less motivated. So as you see, when we start putting more demands on kids in school or in social events, when we start requiring them to do more and more and more, pretty soon they start building that resentment of wanting to do anything, so that intrinsic desire gets kind of pushed to the wayside or buried, and the students don't want to do it anymore. And this occurs when students and this can also occur when students have to become responsible for things that are not interesting to them. Have you ever had to put students in charge of something that they didn't want to do? Okay. Did they fight you on it? Yes. So those things occur when students, start acting like that. So if that kind of helps you understand a little bit why they are doing what they're doing, that is why. Okay, there are 3 levels of extrinsic motivation. One, external, which is when students are working towards a tangible reward or receiving a course grade. Introjective, which is being internally focused on activities rather than externally. An example would be a student feeling guilty for not completing an assignment. And then identified regulation, this is the 3rd stage, and the extrinsic motivation is self-regulated, which means the student will start performing the task it is personally finding worthwhile. The effects of rewards and intrinsic motivation. Studies have shown that rewards can be beneficial, but they find them more as a controversy. And I think we all kind of suffer from that. We're so used to giving rewards, that when we stop doing that and try to get them on the intrinsic path, we find it more of a battle. And some of the authors are explaining. They say that rewards are only effective as long as the rewards are there to keep the students active. So as long as you have a reward for what you're doing, then the kids are going to do it. But if you run out of that reward and expect the kids to do it, they're going to probably fight back. If rewards run out, so does the interest of being engaged. Pink, that talks about rewards, really good author, has a lot of interesting things to talk about intrinsic motivation, is stating that rewards dull the mind and creativity, and it's believed to cause harm. What he's saying is rewards really aren't really beneficial when you're trying to get kids to do something. They work only if there is a clear set of rules for a task, and then the rewards will be beneficial. So basically stating, if you have, for example, like I did with my kids, a relay race, I said you got 5 laps, or 15 laps, each student in that group, because there was 5 students in the group, you have 3 laps each. If you complete your 3 laps and you guys get the fastest time, then you're going to get a pizza party. So, kids were really excited. They were on task, they did it, they never stopped. And what was really nice about that is I had a clear set of rules. But then when I set up extrinsic rewards of saying, okay, if you run this many laps in this many minutes, but if you get under this, then I'll give you 50 points. Not really stating anything more than that. The kids were like, well, okay. And I didn't have a lot of response on that. Even though I had students do it, not a lot of them took the benefit of that incentive. Now, since I was looking through all of those things to find what type of motivation was important, I then had to decide what intervention I was going to use, and what I was going to do with my students was partnering. We were in the weight room, and part of my study was, if I'm going to have them partner up, what do they say about partnering? And there was a lot of things. One of the things was called cooperative learning. It said group work in classrooms that require students to work together or in a collaborative fashion that involves a group task. There were benefits of cooperative learning, which built better relationships, which led to stronger interactions and contributed to higher self-esteem. Grouping students fosters an interdependence where members grow to value each other's help. And they also express some concerns where they talked about cooperative learning in middle school. You simply cannot place students in groups without teaching social skills and proper structure. Unlike in high school where you can tell a group of kids, or college, okay, you guys need to do this. You still have to have structure, because being in groups myself, still had to be told. But in middle school, if you don't tell them this, and this, and tell them that they're going to be in a group mixed with a lot of different kids, because we know kids, how they are with other groups, their age and gender, they don't tend to really get along, so you really have to teach them proper skills in order before that stuff's going to work. So that was some concerns about, cooperative learning. And then I was asking, do students prefer to work in groups? And there are benefits when asked if students like working in groups. But it's not always clear-cut, because even though there's benefits that involve individual accountability, interpersonal elements, and small skills, the negative is, even though students accomplish more work in groups, does not mean all of them recognize that the benefit of it or appreciate it. Sometimes they do it because they have to, not because they want to. Some positive attributes, though: you do get contributing, you do get learning, and you do get people sharing the workload. So there's negatives and positives. Some more negative attributes is that they said that they had problems with people working in groups is task assignment. What kind of assignments are they going to be doing? Is it something that's related? Coordinating with members. If you're working in groups, do you have to do certain time limits? Do they have to meet at certain places? Being able to get together. And students that are working that run cooperative. How many of you have had to put kids in groups and they do nothing but sit there? Okay, that's some of the problems that they find with group work. Okay, attitudes are also, were asked about, if attitudes affected academics. And Chapman and Vaughn at Keene in 2001, stated that students' attitudes about group work is related to academic performance. They said students who have higher GPAs were less positive about group work. You might see that students, kids that are the smarter ones in your class, do not like working in groups. They'd rather work alone. But if you have the kids that are on the lower end of the scale of the GPA, they want to work in groups because they like it, they don't have to do as much, and they get to socialize a little bit more. So there are some benefits and negatives to being in a group, and you have to kind of figure out how you're going to do that. Some things in the readings we're talking about placing the higher GPA students with some of the lower GPA students. So the higher GPA students became almost more like tutors. Okay, so if you're going to do that, that was one of the things that they talked about. It says, do project design factors influence attitudes? They said students were more positive about group work and benefits when the instructor was helping with the group dynamics, management, and various teaching methods. Some potential costs would be, they would find that sometimes the unequal workloads, free writing by classmates, and coordinating with each other were some of the issues when it dealt with designing the factors. But definitely, teacher involvement is very important in group work. Like earlier, I was talking about peer tutoring. Since teachers cannot seem to be everywhere, peer tutoring is a useful strategy that ensures timely feedback to students. For me, in a class of 54 students, when I'm doing a lesson, it's extremely hard to give feedback to every student. And one of the things I've struggled is turning over some of that teaching to the kids that really know what they're doing. Because of class management, you get kids who always want to mess around. So you tend to want to hold those reins. But if we were to allow ourselves to get students in our class that are responsible more of a peer tutoring challenge, they can help you as a teacher and assist you in giving more feedback and helping kids with stuff. It offers assistance to students in instruction as well as additional feedback. And peer tutoring is one of the most widely used methods when it comes to student assistance. So as teachers, have you guys engaged or used peer tutoring in your class.
All the time.
All the time.
Absolutely.
Okay, sorry for the small font. I had to put a lot on here. Students would be paired to work together. This was my intervention. Again, my unit was in the weight room and fitness run. I was going to be pairing students up to work together through the entire intervention. They would be working 2 days on the mile, which are Mondays and Fridays, and 3 days in the weight room. On mile run days, Mondays is a 16-minute run, and what we normally do is we have the students pair up. They would run their 6 laps, but in the beginning of my intervention, we had what we call the alleyway and the field, so my students were running 5 laps, which is equal to a mile on a normal track. And what the students were responsible for was to encourage each other while they were running to help and motivate each other to do better on their runs. They would be required to complete their laps within the 16 minutes in order to get their entire credit. On Fridays, it was a 20-minute run. We use this as a way to have the students do more laps if possible. And we were using some of the other incentives. Was one of the things for my class was I'd offer extra points if they can complete so many laps in the mile. And during my intervention, I had a total of 8 run days, but due to some of the weather, I was only able to get 6. In the weight room, skipped. What worked and what didn't work on the run. I found out that when students had to run the mile, and some of the incentives I offered were like 50 points. If you can run under the 11 minutes in the 16-minute run, I'll give you an additional 50 points towards your grade. One of the things I found that kind of worked on that but didn't really work is the kids didn't buy into it too much. But then when I offered them on a Friday 100 points, if they can complete 5 laps, for every 5 laps they completed, they got an additional 100 points. I still had a lot more kids kind of pick up and do it, but not too many. But the one thing that I did say that worked is as soon as I had the students team up in a relay and offered them that pizza party, I had every kid active, every kid was running. I even had the kids yelling at the other kids to run faster because they wanted to win that pizza party. And I think the fastest time overall when it was done was like 14 minutes for the 15 laps total. Now when we got down to the weight room, these were all done on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Students were paired up, had to work on weightlifting and cardiovascular. What I did is during the intervention, before they could do it, I gave them a test on the safety skills and procedures. They had to pass that test in order to continue lifting. And once they did, then I broke out a lifting chart that broke down how to lift by reps, pounds, sets. And what they did is with their partner, they would write down the lifting amount. For example, if they were doing the bench press, they'd put bench press, how much weight, how many repetitions, how many pounds they did, and they would work on that, and they'd keep track of that for a total of 3 days a week. And on the sheet, I think it would work. I think I got like 2 weeks out of it because they staggered it down. The students were free to choose what they wanted to lift. So one of the things I did as an incentive was I didn't say, okay, you have to do this one, this one, this one today. I gave them the ability to choose what they wanted to work on, but they were responsible with their partner to keep track of what they were doing. One of the other things that I wanted to kind of foster a little bit of an intrinsic, to see if it was intrinsic motivator, was we did what we call the one-time max lift. That's where the students have to lay down on the bench press, they put a certain amount of weight, they lift it once. If they get it, I allow them to take it down one more notch, they lift again, and they keep doing that until they can't. The incentive there was to see how many would continue doing it on their own without me saying, oh, come on, do it again. Oh, come on, do it again. The kids really liked it, so we were able to get that in on one of the, a couple of the lifting days that we were doing that. Again, the kids were, like I said, were required to take a safety test in order to lift the weights. My data collection. I took a lot of data on this, and part of me feels like one of the things that, towards the end of the things that I would recommend for further research is, I think, maybe scaling back a little bit, because sometimes I felt like I was so involved in data that it really got overwhelming at times, but it also gave me a big picture of what the kids were doing. So the very first thing I did before they even started the intervention was I gave them a pre-post survey. And on that survey there were 5 sections with 6 questions each. Each section, the main topic was one. The first one was, I don't like to participate in physical education because this was more A-motivated related. If they were to answer those questions and had a huge response in the always section, then I would know that a lot of my kids were going to be A-motivated. The second one was a blend of intrinsic, extrinsic. It says, I'm motivated to participate in physical education because. My next topic was, I like working with a partner because I wanted to see a little bit if they thought working with a partner was going to be a positive thing for them. The fourth one is I participate in physical education activities because, and in some ways that almost looks like the same as number 2, but one is a participation kind of element, the other one is a motivational element. The last one is I feel my teacher has an interest in my learning and it motivates me. That was part of part of my things that I wanted to look at into my primary and secondary question was, is the teacher also important in the motivation of students? And I know it sounds obvious that we are, but some teachers may not think that they're the main reason they should be there, but obviously we are. The weight room participation survey was another one I took. This was given each week. It's scaled from 1 to 10, with 1 being strongly disagree and 10 being strongly agreed. This survey was given to rate their motivation and participation in class each week. And then finally, the other quantitative survey I gave was a running reflection. It was scaled 1 through 5, 1 being rated as poor, 5 being rated as excellent. This was a self-assessment as well as a peer assessment. So the students were also going to self-assess themselves and their partner. So it wasn't just me looking. Now they were going to evaluate each other to see how each student reacted. And here is a copy of the PE survey, and you can see had several questions on it. Section 1, just an example of one of the questions in there is, I don't participate in physical education because I don't find PE interesting or motivating. When I get to the data, it's going to be really interesting that a lot of the kids that I thought was the reason wound up not being the reason. This one was the weight room survey, 10 questions. It ranged anywhere from why they liked to be in class, if they thought they were lifting better, did they feel motivated, was their partner being helpful. So it was a whole blend, was the teacher encouraging. So it was a wide range of questions that kind of I tried to hit every base to see how the kids overall would respond. The running reflection was done for a Monday, Friday. They would run Monday. They would rate themselves from poor to excellent on how they felt they did. And then they would come back on Friday and they would look at similar questions that were related to Monday to see if they felt like they did better than Monday. And it was kind of hard because we had 2 run days that kind of got nixed in the bud because it was so hot out. The kids we were just not running because it would just be too much for them. My method of collection was quantitative or qualitative as well. I also had the students do a personally weekly reflection. This was written out with 5 questions. Did personal participation improve? Did motivational output improve? What types of day did they feel, or days did they feel they felt motivated? What drove them or drives them to be motivated and participate in each day? Do you feel motivated when the teacher is giving incentive and rewards? So it's kind of mixed again to kind of get an overall view of what they were feeling. And then I had interview questions. This was given at the last week of the intervention to get a more accurate view of how they felt while they were participating in the intervention. This one right here was what the personal weekly reflection questions were. How motivated do you feel at the beginning of the week compared to the end of the week? Do you feel less motivated on some days? Why do you feel this way? What type of days do you feel more likely to participate in class? What drives you to be motivated and to participate in class each day? And then again, do you feel you are more motivated when the teacher gives incentives, rewards, or do you feel motivated because you have the desire to succeed on your own? Then interview, I had 5 questions. Question number 4 I broke down into 2 subcategories. If they answered if they were more internally desired in motivation, they would have answered A, why are you feeling more internal motivated? And then if they answered they were more motivated based on rewards, incentives, and praise, then they would answer B, why do you feel rewards, incentives, and praise? Believe it or not, most of my kids in the interview answered A, which I found really odd because throughout the intervention, most of them said rewards and praise and grades was one of the important factors. But when it came down to asking them what they felt, they thought they felt more internally motivated. So it was kind of interesting. My tables and graphs. When I broke down each of my sections of the pre and post survey, you look at it here a little closer. Section 1 was again the A motivated part of the survey, where they were talking about why they didn't participate in physical education. And it was really interesting to see that on number 6 didn't show up for some reason, that they did participate because that the largest majority was number 6 that didn't show up there. I don't know why. This is because the teacher is boring and not interesting. A lot of them disagreed with that, so that made me feel good. So, I felt like, okay, I feel vindicated a little bit here that I'm not the cause that they don't like to participate, so they at least enjoyed coming to class. When you look all the way to always for the pre and post, you see only like 1 to 2 students on the average felt like they were A, motivated all the time. So not very many. So a large majority felt like throughout the pre and post that they didn't really have the energy to participate. And it's like, okay, why? And as I thought about it, some of the things that came to my mind was 1, it's right after lunch. 2, on hot days when you're hot and after lunch you get tired. So that's going to contribute to them not wanting to participate in education or PE. So between the disagree and post and the disagree pre, a lot of it stayed similar except for number 4 dropped, which was because I don't have energy. By the post survey, that kind of dropped down a little bit, and more of 5 because they said I forgot my clothes was a disagree. So they stayed pretty much constant, that none of that was ever an issue. And when I did a bar graph on all the questions totaled together, 59.47% of the kids disagreed in the beginning, and it just slightly dropped at the post-test, that they all still disagreed, that none of those reasons were reasons why they didn't want to participate. So I felt that kind of took out any of the A motivation factors. Then when I got over to I'm more motivated to participate in PE because, and again, I don't know why, I've always had problems with some of my stuff staying in the picture. Anyway, number 5 that's not showing up, luckily I brought this, this is because I want good grades. And number 6 that's not up there that should be is because I want to be healthy and it makes me feel good. During the Disagree and post and pre, you notice again the shift is different because this is talking about what the kids found more motivating in PE. What really stood out when I looked at this was number 5 on both of them. They increased in both, which was number 5 was because I want good grades. Most of the kids participated because the grade was the most important thing for them in class. Okay. The other top motivators was because the teacher makes it fun to learn, which was because I like to succeed and I want to participate, which was number 3, and number 6, which because I want to be healthy and it makes me feel good. So those were the top 3 motivators, but the biggest one that stood out was obviously the grades. And you will notice that even when they started the pre-questions, overall, all the questions answered even dropped down to 9%. And in the pre, the sometimes even dropped down from 44 to 39, and the post went up almost 12% at the end. So towards the end of the study, the more the kids started feeling a little bit more motivated on why they wanted to participate. Section 3 was I like working with a partner. This one was kind of up and down, but the one thing that kind of stood out with why they like working with a partner, again, do I have that one? Did I see some of my fingers show up? Number 3 in the post and the pre is because it was more fun than working alone. That was some of the main things that the teacher or the students felt that was the reason they liked working. Then number 2 is because I get more done factor. And then the next top one was number 5 because I learned more with a partner. So that was what really kind of got me when I was looking at the interviews and the stuff. The students, the kids that I interviewed, because I interviewed 10 kids, those 10 seemed to be more internally motivated to work alone. But the majority of the class, they felt like working with a partner was better for them because they felt like they got more done. And again, on the bar graph over here, with all questions averaged in, the pre sometimes, again, dropped down to 32% from 42%. And the pre always jumped almost a complete 10% jump from pre always to post always. So at the end, more of the kids felt more motivated and liked choosing working with a partner. In section 4, I participate in physical education activities. The biggest one here, number 4, is again, why? The grade. The grade was the most important thing for them. And that stayed consistent in the pre-survey always, as well as in the post-survey. Even though it dropped from 38 to 35, it was still well over 80% of the class felt the grade was the most important thing. And averaged all the way over, you will notice that my bar graph from post sometimes to the post always, all, big improvement. Pre-post survey, when I emailed it, it didn't come out too well. I had it all fixed. I get to looking at the table. This one was, I feel my teacher has an interest in my learning and it motivates me. Again, the biggest part of that were the students was number 4. Even in the pre and always, it came from 38 from the always pre, but it came down to 28 was number 4, and that was the teacher. Let's see if I have it on this one. Ah, man. Anyway, it's because frustrated here because I didn't, when I emailed it, it didn't email over right, and I had it all saved. They found that the teacher has more interest in what they were teaching. I know number 3 was one of the highest ones, which went from 8 to 23. And if I remember, the teacher the teacher shows interest in what I'm learning was number 4. And then the next biggest one was number 2, because he demonstrates how the activity is working. So those 3 things were important to the students and what they found that motivated them. And on the overall bar graph, it started out pretty slow, but by the post, 65% of the students overall felt like those things and those questions are what motivated them to be in class and like what the teacher was doing. Then I had my weight room participation surveys. This one I know looks like a lot of lines, and in a sense it is, but you will notice most of the students throughout the survey, it stayed pretty consistent. It's nothing, didn't seem to really change too much, but then one thing that I noticed mostly out of all of this is numbers, let's see, number 8 and 9. Teacher was always highly interested and motivated. That was one of the things they found important when they were participating in class. They really felt like it was important that the teacher was showing motivation in what they were doing. They also, number 7, they liked helping my partner do better. Number 8, positive attitude in class is highly motivating. They noticed that if they were highly positive in class, that they felt more motivated. But not too many felt, on the disagree. They didn't find really a disagree a lot of these. In the very first one, though, it was interesting that there was more of an average of number 5, kind of fell in between, and that was 1 and 2. Lifting more than I was able to, and motivated to lift today, felt productive. A lot of them felt kind of mediocre at that point in the beginning. But as the weightlifting went on, I noticed the kids were always asking questions. Was I doing my chart right? They were helping their partner, and pretty soon I could see the shift more going over to 10. That they were strongly agreed that all the things that on this list was important to them. And again, the highest one was 19. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, number 7. Helping my partner do better was one of the more important things in the weight room. So that was one of the motivators. And wow, I can't believe they did that to me. I don't know, maybe I can see if I can. Good thing I do have those. The running reflection. For week 1, what we did is I had the students do their running, and what they wound up doing is they would run their required laps, and at the end of the mile run, they would come back and they would take a survey of the 5 questions, and they would rate themselves, and it would be poor, good, or excellent for Monday, and then they would come back and do poor, good, or excellent on Friday, and then at the end, they would then do a comparison for the next week. But the first week, what we did is we ran, on week 1, was just a regular 16-minute run. And what I noticed was the highest motivator, or one of the things that was really evident in here, is that the students felt like they could do better. And then they turned around and said that their partner was able to do better. So they were looking at what they were doing as trying to say, I know I could do better, but I know my partner can do better too. And that was more important to them than whether they did their best run or not. And that was in the first week. And then on the second week, week 2, that was one of the ones where we only had the Monday. A lot of the students, again, on series 3 and 4, which was questions 3 and 4 for Monday. Do you think your partner could have done better? Do you think you could have done better? Again, were the same things the students looked at on their run. This was better. This gives you a better look. And then on week 3, and we got to do our Monday, Friday run. You will notice on Friday, huge difference in performance. That was when we did the relay race. Okay. So as you can look at the other days, and then on the last week, you know, the kids were still kind of pumped up from running on Friday, and then on Monday they still performed really well. But you will notice on Monday's run, the two things that still stood out was the partner and themselves doing better. But by the time they got to Friday, number 1 shot up dramatically compared to all the other weeks, which is did better on my run than I did Monday, because they were all competing. They were challenging with others, so they obviously felt like they did better. And then 2, how they rated each other's competition, or not their motivation, that spiked compared to all the other weeks too. That was 23 compared to 12, almost doubled. Their feeling of motivation went up. So in my study, I noticed that if I did a competition with more than a couple of kids, and there was that incentive of a pizza party, that motivation level rised up quite a bit. And then week 4, we only were able to run on Monday because, again, we had that huge heat wave that shut us down for Friday. So we were only able to kind of look at a couple of things. But what I really noticed in the last one is all of my numbers almost doubled compared to all the other weeks for the very last run. They were all more feeling like they did better on the run. I think they were still kind of flying high off of the Friday relay, even though it was after the weekend. So they came and they really wanted to perform. And a few of them asked me if we were going to be doing something like that again after, you know, the intervention was over. And I said, you know, we could look into it. So that was, you know, my running reflection. Reflection in interviews. Then I got to my findings and discussions. Personal reflection survey. How motivated were some of the things that I found? Is that right? Yeah. Let's see if I was skipping here. Oh yeah. In the findings and discussions, weekly reflection and interviews was the next thing I was looking at. This is more the qualitative part. In the personal reflection surveys, those were some of the questions I was looking at. And the answers that I got were kind of interesting. Out of questions 1 and 2, it says, how motivated are you at the beginning of the week compared to the end of the week? And then 2, how do you feel motivated on some days and why? The biggest thing that I got was I don't have energy. So again, that was another thing that popped up earlier in the surveys, is not having enough energy. Number 3, majority of my students said they were more likely to participate more during the middle of the week. I don't know, did you have some of the kids feeling like they're more energized by the middle of the week than they do at the beginning of the week? I know I did. And number 4, the majority of my students said that getting good grades was the most important reason for participation. Again, that was another thing that stood out from the findings that I found. So number 5 was, do you feel more motivated when the teacher gives incentives? Believe it or not, that was almost split down the middle. Half said they found that it was more motivating. 45% said that they didn't find incentives or rewards that motivating at all. So that was one thing that I found kind of interesting. Student interviews, I did 10 students. 5 boys, 5 girls. I just randomly picked their numbers because they were numbered 1 through 44. When I interviewed them, I said, what were some of your personal feelings about physical education and why do you feel that way? A lot of the students, when I interviewed them, and I compared all the interviews, said that they felt PE was important and critical to their health. So a lot of the students knew PE was important for them. So that was really kind of a nice thing to find out. I said, do you think being motivated is important in success and improving in a class? Again, majority of my interviews said that motivation was important, and it was because it helped with their grades. Again, grades stood out again, help, and making them push themselves to do better. So they did find that motivation is an important thing. So why? But weren't they more motivated more often? Again, it came back to probably, you know, being tired and not having energy. And do you feel work as an individual or with a partner? Do you prefer that? 8 of the 10 students, believe it or not, said they would rather work on their own. And the reason why is because of distraction. You know, some of them felt like that working with a partner, even though it was beneficial with some things, it was more of a distraction for them because they got busy visiting or talking with one another. What motivates you to be better in class? Many of the students said that the internal desire was what motivated them because they liked to succeed and because they liked PE. My conclusion was that when I put everything together and started looking at all of my stuff, I felt like my intervention was a success because the students in their surveys indicated that they enjoyed working with partners, and being that said, a lot of them felt like they were motivated when they did that. And one of the things I was looking for in my intervention was what type of motivation was it. I felt like my intrinsic motivation was one of the things that was the biggest piece for my students, and the reason is because, again, grades was one of the important things, and then as it was said in my study, that was one of the intrinsic things about extrinsic motivation, was kids wanted a tangible thing, which was a grade. So I felt like I found out the information I needed. I felt like my students were more extrinsic motivated. The only thing that I can find in my findings and discussion in the end where they say what would I look at changing, some different things, just a little bit longer than the 4-week intervention that I had. I might change up not using as much data collection, try to focus more on what I'm doing in the class. The other things that I would look at is definitely extending it longer than the 4 weeks. And I think it would have been nicer to have a variety of lessons, because we're so compacted in PE, we can't like do different activities to see if it affects what we're doing. If we're in a specific unit, we're stuck in that unit. In other schools, I know they have a larger area, they can do different type of activities. So for me, being in the weight room, it was really limited. You know, you can only do this, this, and this. So I had to, I had to work with what I had. So overall, that's kind of what I had. Any questions? Well, I thank you for coming and spending that time. Yes?
I think, like, just going back to what you were saying for doing it longer, I know since you're, how it is set up at our school, where you're stuck in the weight room, when you're doing it longer, you're going to be able to compare, like, for this time period that I'm in the weight room and then the time period that you're out in the field, you might be able to stretch it that way.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was looking at. It would be nice to be able to, if it was longer, I could take that class into 2 different units and see if the activity I was doing had a big impact on the motivational piece. But since we had only 4 weeks with our study, it like crunching it, and you know, in some ways, I feel like I found that it was a success, but it could be kind of not really a complete picture. But I thought I had a lot of data that told me a lot of things. So yeah.
Okay, I apologize for being late. Were there male and females?
Yes, there were. It was almost half and half. 21 female, 23 males.
Okay.
Any other questions? I thank you guys for coming and giving up some of your time.
Okay.
Thank you. you very much.
You have to do a feedback survey for everyone? Okay. I'm sorry it's late.
Oh, that's okay.
We got sidetracked.